Hi, good evening and welcome. So my name is Victoria Spears and I have the distinct honor of serving as the Vice Chair for the Orangeville Public Library Board. Tonight, I bring greetings on behalf of the Library Board for this very important event as we gather to explore the incredible story of No. 2 Construction Battalion, the first and only all-Black battalion in Canadian military history. This evening's event is made possible through our valued partnership with the Dufferin County Canadian Black Association, also known as the DCCBA, supported by the town's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Strategy. We are truly privileged to have with us tonight retired Captain Kevin Junor. At the Orangeville Public Library, we strive to connect our community, help patrons discover untold stories, and empower everyone to soar to new heights of understanding and appreciation of our shared history. Through events like this, we strive to fulfill this mission as part of our ongoing commitment to the town's equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy, enduring, recognizing, and honoring the contributions and achievements of Black individuals and communities throughout Black History Month and beyond. Since the inception in 2020, the partnership between the DCCBA and the Orangeville Public Library has aimed to bring vital stories to the forefront. Today, we come together to learn the important story of No. 2 Construction Battalion, an essential part of Canadian history, and a testament to the resilience and courage of those who paved the way for future generations. I encourage you all to take this opportunity to listen, learn, and reflect on the profound impact of No. 2 Construction Battalion and the broader Black community in shaping our nation. Please join me in welcoming Alethea O'Hara-Stevenson, President and founder of the DCCBA, to introduce our speaker tonight. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. How are you doing?
Great.
Excellent. It is my absolute honor to stand before you tonight to share the legacy of No. 2 Construction Battalion. As mentioned earlier, DCCBA has proudly partnered with the Orangeville Library since our inception in 2020, and that partnership has been incredible to our community, sharing the stories, celebrating the voices, and just celebrating Canadian history. It's Black History Month, but I'm proud of the partnership that we've established to carry on these stories beyond Black History Month, and the library has done an amazing job of doing just that. This month, specifically today, we're proud to take this partnership to new heights by sharing the legacy of No. 2 Construction Battalion. And who better to do that story, to share that legacy, than retired Captain Kevin Junor, who has spent over 40 years with the Canadian Armed Forces. He started off his career with the Toronto Scottish Regiment, where he was a regimental sergeant major. And the story that I first heard was that he wasn't going to have to wear a kilt, but somehow he ended up wearing a kilt. He can also share lived experience, and one of the phrases that he's often talked about is the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's experienced it all, but more importantly, he can share the legacy of No. 2 Construction Battalion. What is also critically important is that Captain Junor was instrumental in helping to secure the apology that took place 3 years ago, July 9th, by the Government of Canada. Along with his incredible resume, he has the Order of Military Merit, and most recently, the highest honor in Ontario, which was the Order of Ontario. So please welcome Captain Kevin Junor to the podium. Thank you.
I get nervous when I speak. I'm blessed and I'm really humbled to be able to talk with you tonight. And it's a conversation. And I'd like to tell you stories of individuals who I respect and who've shaped the landscape from which I've been able to excel. But I'd be remiss if I didn't, at this time, just identify a colleague. When I was standing up here, I looked down and I saw a friend, and I'll call him out, Ron Alcom. Ron is also a retired lieutenant colonel from the Canadian Armed Forces. Ron's distinguished career, multiple tours overseas, came up to become the regimental sergeant major of his regiment, and then eventually commanded the regiment. So very few people have ever done that. But Ron is one that has accomplished that. And again, we came up together in our career. Somebody I respect immensely, but don't tell him I said that. For King and Country was a topic that was selected because these men wanted to serve not just country, but the king, right? And this should be, there we go. So, World War I broke out. And when war broke out, it was the right thing to do to serve. Right? How can you not serve when your country is threatened? So, here we are, we have the war is being fought, and I love the media. It is said that, you can't use that. Fail to enlist, you're a coward. Who wants to be a coward? Right? So if you don't join the military and serve king and country, then you have to be a coward. Right? A real man is gonna make sure that he steps up. And the language that I'm going to use, back in those days, it wasn't man or woman, it was a man's world, right? So that's the kind of language that I will be using as I speak. So here we had a number of men who decided that, yes, I'm going to serve king and country, and it is the right thing to do, so I'm going to do it. But there was a problem when black men went to say, I'm going to serve. And I'm going to get into that quite a bit. There is something about when people start to get hurt, people start to die, you're going to change how you think, right? So all of a sudden we have war and people are rushing to join the military. But then reality hits and people start to die and say, well, I don't know if we're going to go. Right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Then around 1916, when the casualties were growing, that's when the landscape really changed. And the government had to make some decisions as to how they're going to make things happen. And about 1917, conscription came in, and the men that were being rejected before, now we're told that you gotta go fight. All right? So over the next little while, I'm gonna go through that journey from the time when they were rejected to the Prime Minister of Canada actually giving an apology to the descendants of number 2. Right? And I try to say this whenever I do this talk. I am by no means a subject matter expert. I'm a guy that's got a little bit of knowledge, and Ron will tell you I don't have too much, right? But I've got enough that I can be dangerous. When I joined the military, we all learned about regimental history. And each cap badge speaks to a different regiment, right? Or the far left is the Navy, senior service, right? And then you've got the other units. You've got the Royals, you've got the RCR, you've got the Queen's Own Rifles, which was the last unit I served with. And below them, you've got the Toronto Scottish. And over to the left, at the bottom, is the 48th Highlanders of Canada. And you've got all these other units that are there, the PPCLI, etc. So you learned about all of these regiments because it's what we do, right? At the bottom, I struck that one cap badge out because I heard nothing about it. But all the other regiments, we're very proud of the service of the logistics. We're proud of the service of the Air Force, the artillery. And it went on. But there is a man, Calvin Rook, Senator Calvin Rook, late Senator Rook. He did some research. And through his research, he found out about No. 2 Construction Battalion. And he wrote a couple books, The Black Battalion, Canada's Best Kept Military Secret. And from there, conversations started to happen. And I went through my entire career, and it wasn't until I was a regimental sergeant major, which is at the peak of my career. I mean, this is, any soldier would like to be the RSM. And I didn't know about these men until I was the RSM. Right? So when I learned about them, I was also in a position of privilege where I can make sure that I use my position to pass knowledge on to others. So a part of what we did was the book For My Country. I was on the team that made sure that that book was written and distributed across the entire Canada Armed Forces. So let's start and talk about what happened. Black men volunteered to fight for king and country, and they were denied. And literally, it was, you're black, go home. So, as that happened, and I'll tell you for me personally, if that was me, and I went and I volunteered and they said, well, go home, you can't fight, I'd go home and have a coffee. I wouldn't feel bad. Because I did my duty, and you can't call me a coward, right? Because I stepped forward. But not these men. They fought for the right to be able to go on foreign soil and potentially spill their own blood and potentially not come back home. Right? So they fought for the right to be able to fight. And they also had advocates, community leaders, who didn't agree with the fact that they were returned their wages because they were black. And they fought for the right to be able to fight. Now, in 1916, casualties started to impact the country. And, you know, I think about the Highway of Heroes. We all know that segment of Highway 401. Think about how that's impacted us, right? All of a sudden, in our lifetime, we're now seeing soldiers coming back home and they're driving along that highway. That has really impacted us as Canadians. So, in the same light, 1916, at that point, the nation was being impacted because a lot of soldiers are dying. And visible minorities started to be accepted. Indigenous people started to be accepted cautiously. Cautiously. Around that time, Britain said, you know, we need special work to be done. So we need a labor battalion. So Canada decided that we'll do 2 labor battalions. And that's the genesis of No. 2 Construction Battalion. So I said that black men were rejected. And they're told it's a white man's war. Well, it's only white men that's going to die. I can die just the same way for a king and country. So it just didn't sit well with the men when they were told that you can't fight. And the commanding officer had a very special role in acceptance of these men. And it's, you will see a number of letters that we actually dug up, and I'll take some excerpt from that. And I'll read. I have been fortunate to have secured a very fine class of recruits, and I did not think it was fine for these men that they should have to mingle with Negroes. I worked in government my entire life, and there's certain things that you don't write. But it was okay for them to write that down because that's how they felt. That was the law. And they did it. There was, within the black community, a pastor, the minister, is at the core of the community. Somebody who advocate for us, and somebody that you can go to for guidance. And I mean, it's really strong. Me coming from Jamaica, you know that anything's going on, you go to the pastor. Right? I came here, it was the same thing. Right? So we had Reverend White, who in a letter that was written when a black soldier wanted to join, and I'll read, a colored man from Truro tried to enlist in the composite or the RCR, Royal Canadian Regiment. We refused to take him. After recruiting me, the Reverend White approached me, the CO of the 105th, about the matter. Since then, word came from Ottawa that there should be no distinction of color for enlistment. So all of a sudden now, you can take everybody. So the times are starting to change, but it's not there yet. We have different levels of government. And, as you know, the federal government will push things down to the provincial government. Provincial government will push it down to the municipal government. And this is a perfect one that we can look at. Here's a letter that says, colored men can be enlisted in any overseas unit, provided that the commanding officer is willing to accept them. Here's the kicker. It's not in the best interest to force the commanding officer to take them. So, it's up to the commanding officer. But, commanding officer, if you really don't want to take them, we're not going to force you. Because we want you to be happy with what's going on. And Ron, you can correct me if I'm wrong. At that time, a commanding officer is just somebody that had money, right? They would raise their own battalion. So if you're in Orangeville, right, and you are a leading member of the community, you got money, you say, well, I want to raise my battalion. You make the case for it. And then what you do, you recruit from Orangeville. And you're now the lieutenant colonel, right? Because that's who you are. So if you have that individual who's saying that, I don't want you as a black man, then do you think that's going to change if the government said that you should accept? That's not going to change. And that's why that, at the end it says, it's not in the best interest to force that person. Do what you want to do. Right? A unit in Toronto, and there are a couple of kilted regiments in Toronto. The commanding officer wrote, and again he's been very clear, being a kilted regiment, I always draw the line at taking colored men on the strength of the battalion. Right? So, by the way, I was the RSM of a kilted regiment. So it didn't impact me too much. And Alethea alluded to this. When the recruiter came to my school, and he was wearing a kilt, Wayne Johnson, and as he was in his kilt, and he's called me over, he said, you should join the army. And I said, yeah, you know, not a bad idea, but I gotta ask you one question, do you have to wear that skirt? And he said, oh, no, you don't have to, right? So I went through my training, and at the end of the training, they lined us up at the QM quartermaster stores, and I said, what are we doing? They said, well, we're sizing you for your kilt. But you promised me I didn't have to wear a kilt. But then that was 1980, and then I were killed for the majority of my career, over 30 years. Right? So it wasn't that bad. But here, the commanding officer is saying, we draw the line at taking these men. There's some people in history that you just don't understand their decision-making process, right? And Jeremiah was one of these individuals, right? The unit, the 106, actually accepted some black men, and it did cause a bit of problem, because people are saying, well, we don't want to be fighting with them. But the commanding officer made the decision, and they were accepted. But what got me about this is Jeremiah Jones was 58 years old when he joined. Now, when I was 58, I didn't want to be running around doing what he had to do. But here's, again, a man that is committed to king and country, and he's saying, I want to serve, and let me serve in the best way that I can. As a matter of fact, a little bit on Jeremiah. While serving overseas, he actually lobbed a grenade into a machine gun pit, killed a number of the soldiers, captured the others, and got them to carry the machine gun to his commanding officer. Cool. Right? He was not recognized for it, even though it was recommended that he be given an award. It wasn't until much later, I think it was about 2010 or so, that we convinced the government to actually posthumously give an award to his family. Right? The man doing it at 58, is he crazy? But he did a good job. Canada committed to the battalions that's going to take care of things, the forestry and labor battalions. And in that, they're saying, here's an opportunity to bring black men in to the military. So they went recruiting for a commanding officer. And you know the commanding officer had to be white. So if they didn't want to soldier with black men to begin with, how are you going to get a commanding officer to say, I'm going to command a battalion of black soldiers? So the recruiting went through, and then eventually they've got Daniel Sutherland to agree to be the commanding officer for the regiment. And when he agreed, then all of a sudden now, it's time to recruit black men to join the military. So from nothing to now there's hope to be able to serve. So on July 5th, 1916, the battalion, number 2 Construction Battalion, was approved. So they're now on the books. Initially, they were headquarters in Pictou, Nova Scotia. Now, I've been to Pictou a number of times, and they'll tell you, even the mayor himself will say, as soon as it gets dark, the entire town is ruled up for black men. If you're black, you cannot be outside at all at night. And they lived through a racist town where they were trained. So recruitment for number 2 was unique, in which we had recruitment from all across Canada, the United States, and the Caribbean. Yes, the Caribbean. Right? So now we have a battalion that is formed of people from all over. And we see, recruiting signs. Number 2 Construction Battalion for Colored Men of Canada. So all of a sudden now we're getting a limited status. Right? Your fortune are equally at stake as those of your white brethren. So you're moving up in status, right? Because we need to fill these positions. Right? Does that make sense? Right? And as I tell this story, you can see that we're on a journey where things are getting better. I like this poster where it gave options to different individuals. So if you're Scottish, Irish, or you like medicine, or you love horses, join these regiments. So you've got an option, right? And then you've got the second one. If you really don't want to fight, you can join the forestry battalion. If you don't want to fight. And then, if you're a colored man and you want to get a chance to fight, join the number 2 Construction Colored Men's Battalion. Remember I told you that the recruiter lied to me? Well, they're lying to them there, because they were not going to be able to fight. That was what they used to draw them in. So what we're going to end up with is you've got the forestry battalion, all white men that don't want to fight, and then you have the number 2 construction battalion, which you're black. That's the only place you can go. So we've got recruitment across the country. I was in Edmonton, Windsor. Remember I started off with the cap badge for all the units? So here we have a cap badge that was designed for number 2. But it was made very clear, it's approved, but we as a government, we're not going to pay for it. Find your own money to pay for it. And here we have the battalion itself. And all the officers, the uniqueness of this battalion is all the officers were white, except for the chaplain. Remember that guy that was speaking up for them up front and said, I want to get them in? He now became the chaplain for that battalion. Right? So we had all white officers except the chaplain, and the chaplain really has no authority. He's there for the guidance, the moral guidance of the unit. Then they go off to war. So they did all their recruitment. They're now sailed, so March 28th, they sailed from Halifax. The 7th of April, they're in Liverpool, England. And what happened after they got there is you now have a unit that's a standalone unit. Right? You've got a battalion. But when war happens, people die. And you've got to be able to replace those individuals. So what they did, and without getting into the military jargon, instead of being a battalion, they downgraded them to a company size, right? So they brought them down to 500 officers and men as a company, and the remainder were left for reinforcement. So if any of these soldiers died, the black men could be used to fill the gaps, right? So the battalion is commanded by a lieutenant colonel. A company is commanded by a major. So the commanding officer now had to make a decision. Do I keep my rank as a lieutenant colonel, or do I go down to a major and go with my unit? There's a couple of things that we've got to consider here. I'm sure he was ostracized for being the commanding officer of an all-black unit. I don't think he had a lot of friends that would support him. And if they gave him command of another unit, how well would he be accepted? So I think, to his benefit, it would be best to stay with the soldiers that he brought. But that's my opinion. There's nothing that's written like that, right? So he took a demotion and he went with his unit. And they were deployed to Jura Mountain, nearby the Swiss border, and they did excellent work, right? The water system made sure that was working properly. It was running, maintaining the road. cutting trees, hauling trees, right? So all the manual labor that current day construction battalion or engineering battalion would be doing, that's what they did back then, right? But as a segregated unit. And here's some photograph of some of what they would be doing, right? You can see in this picture here, they're actually standing on platforms or road that they've got planks because the road was so poor to build, right? So they had to make sure that they did what they needed to do to be able to get by. And in some cases, they were working with white soldiers from other countries. Weren't accepted by ours, but other countries, some did accept them. I like this, the lumber impact. So when you dig a trench, infantry soldiers, we love to dig trenches. Or that's what we're told. Right? But trenches also fall in. So you need wood to rivet them around it so that it's not going to collapse. So soldiers made sure that there's enough wood to be able to do that. Right? Ductworks, the bottom of the trenches. If you've ever stood in the bottom of a trench for a while, I can tell a story with you're standing in the bottom of the trench and it's raining. It's been raining for days, and water is up to your ankle. Right? You just pray that somebody would give you something to stand on, so that you'd be out of the water. All right? They were able to provide the wood, so that could happen. Artillery gun platforms. If you've ever seen artillery fire, right? They make a mess of things. But the wood was able to sort things out. The bottom line said, work of number 2 construction allowed the mills in the Jura to produce twice as much lumber as other units. Now, there's a couple ways that you can look at that. Is it that they were working smart, or is it that they were pushed to work that much harder? I'll leave that to you to decide, right? But they produced twice as much as any other forestry corps within the region. If you want to see a unit stand up with pride, get the band to start playing. Once the band starts to play, a soldier will grow 3 feet. Right? They stand tall and they start to march and they're so proud. There was a band to the number 2 construction battalion. And the band was used in ceremonies. But as they're going in ceremonies, they weren't treated the same way. So you've got an article now that's written about the Coons performing for the Canadian boys. And again, it was okay to write that. War is over. And as the battle is over, it's time to come back home. And when they came home, by January, most of the men from number 2, they were back. Right? But unlike what you saw in the movies where soldiers are coming back to the fanfare and people are meeting them and all the ceremonies, number 2 didn't have that. They came back and nobody even knew that they came back. They went back to their communities, and because it was recruitment from across the country, the government made sure that they had passage to wherever they came from. So if you were from British Columbia, they made sure that you can get back home to British Columbia. Right? So that was done, and that worked out for them. On September 20th, 1920, the battalion was disbanded. And everything was put away. Nothing was said about it. At the end of each year for each battalion, there's a summary that is done, and that is archived. They were archived so well that nobody could find out anything about it until Senator Ruck found out and he wrote the book. The brave men of the battalion served king and country. Their patriotism, professionalism, their discipline, their resilience was demonstrated at all times. Just think about the experience that they had, but yet still they performed their task. As a soldier, I didn't always like what my boss wanted me to do. But at the end of it, I had to do it because I'm told to do it. But if you're doing that and you overlay all of that with racism, it makes it that much harder. Now, Alethea mentioned that. I can tell you about racism in the military. I can tell you about the good, the bad, and the ugly. But imagine what they went through at that time when it was okay for somebody to walk up to them and say, "You're a coon." Right? But they did the job, and they did it well. Individuals came back. William Gale from Jamaica. Gentlemen who served and kept on serving. George, World War I and World War II. Went on to being a doctor. And as you know, for a lot of black men, the only job you could get was a porter. This really hit me when I went to Nova Scotia within the last 4 or 5 years. And somebody took me on a tour. And he took me to a cemetery. I said, "Well, why do I want?" He said, "Let me show you this cemetery." The cemetery is divided into the cemetery and the CS. The CS is a colored section. So we have men of number 2 Construction Battalion that when they died, they were buried in the colored section. For king and country. But yet still, in death, there's still segregation. There's a plaque of Queen's Park to the men of number 2 Construction Battalion. You can go there and you can see it yourself. Monuments in Pictou, Nova Scotia. But there's a guy who dared to dream, Captain George Borden. And he said that the government should apologize. And he initiated that. And a number of us jumped on the bandwagon. And eventually, we met with the Minister of National Defense. And here's a backdrop to the apology. The Minister of National Defense, Harj Sajan, when he was a captain, I was one of his mentors. And I took my team to Nova Scotia to the celebration for number 2 Construction Battalion, and Harj was a part of that team. Fast forward a number of years, we're now having conversation with the government of Canada, and who is the Minister of National Defense? Harj Sajan. And Harj spoke to me after that, and he goes, "Kevin, it was easy for me to approve that because of the groundwork that you did when I was a young captain." So I was invited to be on the National Apology Advisory Committee. And we had consultations across Canada, actually across the world, because we had people phoning in from different countries. And at the end of it, we had an apology. And one of what we're looking at is, what should the apology be? Who should deliver the apology? what sort of meaningful language should we have in the apology? So all of that was sent to the government of Canada. And the document that is there, that we're holding on to, there was an apology document that was signed by the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister only. And it's printed and it's being circulated right now. But the night before the official apology, the Minister of National Defense met with all the direct descendants that was there. And after that meeting, she went to the Prime Minister and asked permission to be able to also co-sign that document. So the apology that we have there's only one that is printed, that is co-signed by the Minister of National Defense. All the others that were signed, there might have been other copies now, but all the other ones that were signed up until that point was only signed by the Prime Minister. And on July 9th, 2022, on the grounds where that picture was taken of the entire battalion, on that ground, we had the Prime Minister of Canada apologize to the descendants of No. 2 Construction Battalion. And he used words like, for the overt racism of turning black volunteers away when they offered to sacrifice their lives for us all, for the blatant anti-black hate and systemic racism that denied these men dignity in life and in death, we are sorry. Quote from the Prime Minister of Canada to the descendants of the man who served in No. 2 Construction Battalion. I never thought that was possible, but I was there to see and to hear the Prime Minister of Canada deliver those words. We've got a stamp to No. 2. A tune was written by this petty officer. We've got a coin and a lot more to come. There's actually a coin here, approval that's been given. So the badge of No. 2 Construction Battalion, and on the back of that coin is DCCBA, approved by the Government of Canada. In the middle, there's a medallion that was made for the apology. I believe there's only 1,500 that was made, and that's it. In which every member of every descendant that was at the apology, and after, if they weren't there, could request a medallion. And VIPs, yeah, they gave me one too. So the journey from black men who first were denied service, and when they were approved to serve king and country, they were given rifles like other soldiers, but they were given pickaxe, they were given shovels, and they were made to feel less than a regular soldier. And you take that journey to on the right, where we have a gentleman who's now a rear admiral, the most senior person in the entire Canadian, black person in the entire Canadian Armed Forces on the left. Next to him is the Sergeant Major of the Canadian Army. So these guys couldn't be in the Army, in the infantry, but here we have the Sergeant Major of the Army, an infantry soldier. We have the Sergeant Major of the RCRs, and me. So from sitting in the back of the bus to being able to be a contributor, lead the organization, to be a successful Canadian Armed Forces. For King and country, these men stepped forward and said, I want to serve. And because of what they did, a guy like me was able to join the military and be able to serve king, queen, and country. And go overseas. And when I went overseas, people didn't really care about my name. They didn't care about who I was. But they saw the Canadian flag on my arm. And they said, that's a Canadian. When Ron went overseas to serve, it didn't matter who he was, but he was Canadian. I can share with you that Ron and myself, we took a number of courses together. And it didn't matter what was going on, because when it's time to study, we were studying together. When it's time to do drill, we're doing it together. When it's time to shoot, we're doing it together. And it didn't matter if he was white and I was black, it wasn't an issue. See how far we've come. At church we sing the song, we've come this far by faith. And today I stand proudly as a retired member of the Canadian Armed Forces who have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the good allowed me to go home and feel good with my family. The bad and the ugly and the very ugly allowed me to go home and think about how can I improve things. And together we work to make things better. Today I am the man I am partly because of my almost 40 years in uniform. So I'm blessed, and thank you very much for listening to me speak to you tonight.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you first and foremost for being here. My name is Joe Andrews, member of Orangeville Council, chair of the town's EDI committee. On behalf of Mayor Post and the other members of council, again, I want to thank you, but more importantly, I want to thank our guest here this evening. I'm honored to be in your presence. As we shared upon my arrival, I'm a proud uncle of a nephew who is a part of our armed forces and is going to be deployed to Latvia very soon. Ron, thank you for your service to our country and anyone else who's in the presence tonight who've also served for our country. The impact of this presentation tonight is going to be a takeaway for all of us. The learning that we've gone through this evening is one that many of us who have done a little bit of research, a little bit of history, maybe I would call it maybe historians at a very small level. This is a story that I think all of us are impacted by, and I'm pleased to hear that we had an apology from our government, but long, long overdue. This is one of those impactful sessions that, again, we're proud to provide to you through the collaboration of the Orangeville Public Library and the town's EDI committee. I have just a couple of words I want to say before I'm going to say a few more things to both Kevin and Alethea. A lot of this work is one that we're still going through in our community, we're going through in our society. I want to truly thank Lauren Tilley and also Natalie Lecce for the organization of this particular event. We have a number of events like this that are in fact organized here at the library. I also want to thank our Vice Chair of the Orangeville Public Library as well, Victoria. As also a member of the Orangeville Public Library Board, we're happy to see these types of activities occur. More importantly, Kevin, I want to thank you for leading this particular presentation. I think the takeaway is that we are impacted in so many different ways with much more to learn, but at the same time, I think that we all need to stand up and be proud of these men who served for our country and have been recognized for their service to our country. It is Black History Month in our community and across this country. And again, Alethea, I want to thank you for your leadership and your organization that in fact is helping us to be educated in so many different ways.
Before I close, I'd like to invite Lauren up and Councillor Andrews on behalf of the Dufferin County Canadian Black Association. I'd like to share with you, I think you're the second recipient of one of the special coins, the challenge coin that was created for DCCBA with the number 2 Construction Battalion's logo on one side and DCCBA's logo on the other side. And this is just in honor of the ongoing work that you're doing, not just for Black History Month, but just throughout the year to celebrate, amplify, recognize, and share these important stories. So thank you for the great work that you're doing.
Absolutely honored. Thank you, Alethea. I didn't know that was happening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.